Okay, so I'm here with Robert Powell, who is affiliated with the SCU. And Robert, I'd like to start out by asking, what's your affiliation with the organization and what do the initials represent?
And I'm sorry, the initial.
And what does SCU stand for?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So SCU stands for the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. So it's fairly self-explanatory about what the organization does. From its name. I'm one of the founders of the SCU. It was founded in September of 2017. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and I am one of the executive board members. And we have a board of directors, which consists of 3 executive board members and 4 at-large board members. And we meet every month, every second Wednesday on the button.
Cool, great. And then what is the mission or goal or objective of the SCU?
Well, the main missions and goals when it was created was basically, at the time we were created, other than CUFOS, which I think you've talked to Mark Rodiger, there was not really a scientific organization that was studying the UAP subject. So that was our basic motivation in creating SCU. And we wanted it to be an active organization. So its basic tenets are using the scientific principle in the study, and to have peer review of papers, to work with government, to work with academia, and to work with the public on the subject and the media. And with the basic objective being to promote it and to get it accepted into the scientific community, because we really feel that the answer to this enigma lies with the scientific community. It won't be resolved, we don't believe, through the military.
Okay. A couple questions about what you just said. Generally on these questions, we go in a little bit of a deep dive and then come back up. And
Sure.
so I just want to clarify a couple of things. You had said aside from CUFOS, so how do you differentiate yourself from CUFOS?
Well, CUFOS is an older organization. It was founded by Dr. Alan Hynek, so it has a lot of history to it. But CUFOS is much smaller than SCU. I'm not sure of their membership, but it's probably no more than maybe 10 people. It's not
really a membership organization, Mark explained to me.
Right. It's not really a membership organization, and it's not really active in terms of what I think of an active organization. So that's the main difference. But CUFOS is one of our partners, so we share the same mission and goals. I mean, the basic overall, scientific approach to the problem. And several of the CUFOS members are also members of SCU.
Yeah, I mean, in my conversation with Mark, I noticed that he said, look, we're not about being a membership organization. They're about just doing the science. And so that would be a perfect partnership with SCU, because you are a membership organization and you're about doing the science. And so that feels like a good collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat. The other thing I wanted to say is that you kind of left out, you said you're focused on using the scientific principles, using peer-reviewed methods, getting papers out there, of which there are very few in the field, papers about UAPs, like vanishingly few. It'd be hard to figure out who the peer reviewers would be, because who else has published in the field in an unclassified way? No one, right?
Oh, right. So for us, our peer review is headed up by Dr. Paul Kingsbury. So Paul is he's a professor at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. And so when he identifies peer review individuals for a paper, and he'll usually contact me to get backgrounds on some of our membership. So we basically, like you said, we can't identify someone who is a physicist with a lot of experience related to UAP, right? So like in the Nimitz paper, right? On our peer review, one was a PhD in physics, another was PhD in oceanography, another was PhD in biochemistry, right? So they're not what you might call ufologists per se. They're more scientists, and we identified their area of expertise based on the paper. So if the paper involves physics or chemistry or biology, then we search for someone with
Or
that.
atmospheric science or robotics or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if someone did a paper on psychological aspects, then we would have someone with backgrounds in sociology and psychology.
Right. Perfect. That makes sense. And then the other thing was that you said that you wanted to work with government, the public and academia, but you didn't mention private organizations. What is the relationship between us? We know that there are private organizations interested in things like potential or purported UAP technology.
Right.
What is your relationship with those organizations?
So, for example, as I mentioned, we have a partnership agreement with CUFOS. We also have one with UAPX. And so making partnerships with other science-based organizations is also part of our charter. And we also have an agreement with UFO DAP. Ron Alch heads up that organization, which basically looks at how can we manufacture automated systems to detect UAP.
I see, but the organizations that you partner with in the private space, so I think UAPX is not a nonprofit, right?
You may be right. I don't know if they are a registered nonprofit or not. I know CUFOS is.
I will check. Oh, for sure, CUFOS is. I will check with Kevin when we talk. I know SCU is a nonprofit, a 501c3, because you just said that. UFO DAP, is that a nonprofit?
I don't think that UFO DAP is a nonprofit. And I'm going to say on UAPX that if they're not a nonprofit, I think they have sent in paperwork to become a nonprofit.
Okay, so they want to become a nonprofit.
I believe so.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is, so UFO DAP, we think that they're not a nonprofit. Your relationship with them is as another partner, but because they're focusing on manufacturing automated systems to detect UFOs, that's in line with your mission. But in any case, it sounds like true to your mission, you want to partner with organizations that can help figure out the science of UAPs.
Right. And so the organizations we partner with, they have to be a scientific, what we consider a scientifically based organization.
So are you also going to partner with the Galileo project, or is that in the air?
The Galileo project, my understanding, is not a nonprofit or a corporation at this point in time. We have members, myself included, that are part of the Galileo project, and Sarah Little's also a member of it, but we're not, as an organization, partnered with Galileo. And I don't know if they're partnered with any other organizations or not. They've only been in existence, I think, about a year.
Okay, so maybe they don't have an entity. It's like a loose collaboration of people.
Yeah, if they do, I'm just not aware of it.
Okay.
But we would consider them a scientific organization.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Okay. So next question, what kind of UAP related data does the SCU work with?
Okay, so by that question, I assume you're talking about UAP data that we could investigate.
Well, whatever you work with, right?
Right. So what we look for before we'll investigate a case, and we may only investigate 1 or 2 cases in a year, is that ideally there are multiple witnesses to the case. There is some type of hard data, either a video or radar or photographs, something, or magnetic measurements. So we have to be able to, there has to be enough information we can really delve into the case and draw some type of conclusions. So for example, in the Nimitz case, we investigated that case because not only were there multiple witnesses, but we were able to draw some conclusions based on their testimony on the radar data, how fast the object disappeared, and there was a video. In the case of the gimbal and the Go Fast videos, which some of your audience is probably familiar with, in those cases there's a video, but there are no witnesses. We don't have, other than the voice you hear on the tape, and unless we can interview the actual witnesses, just the the raw data itself without any testimony is not ideal. It's similar to having witnesses and no raw and no instrumental data.
So wait a minute, we hear the voice on the tape that says wow or whatever. I forget what it says. I remember that one. Or did you see that or whatever?
Yes.
But they refuse to be identified, or what? I mean, those are people, those are witnesses, but you couldn't interview
but they
them?
are active servicemen. So the advantage of the Nimitz case, right, is a lot of these guys had left the service. So to that extent, they were willing to testimony. But to my knowledge, all of those witnesses in the Go Fast and Gimbal, which happened in 2015, so that's only what 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Those guys are still in the service now. Ryan Graves is not, he's retired, but Ryan was not one of the actual witnesses, right? He's a secondary witness. It was his friend that was the guy involved.
Right, got it. You want the person who's voicing on the tape.
Right.
Okay, great. So it sounds like, to summarize, you look for, you will not investigate a case unless there's something beyond the person that says, I saw this weird thing in the sky.
Right.
And then you have to make sure it wasn't a satellite, something, known. You want to make sure it's unidentified to you rather than just unidentified to that person.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And I would say, Julian, in the course of a year, there's probably 8 or 9 cases that we take a quick look at, and it's like, no, there's not enough there, or we know that it's likely to be a prosaic explanation. So
right. So you really only, in the course of a year, you look at maybe 8 or 9 that pass the initial threshold, and then after that, how many of those are all of them on average?
Maybe one might be worthwhile to analyze, because we're looking for some data that goes with it.
Right. And this apparently, I hadn't known about this, so this is new for me. Apparently there's because of, I guess, the classified nature of our weapons systems or something, if you're an active service member, I mean, so according to a lot of active service members, these things, or some, I guess, are happening all the time. But can they not talk about them? I mean, what are the details of that situation? Well,
normally it's someone who's in active service can't just go off and talk to civilians when they choose to do so.
Right.
There is an active service man who's contacted me before, but everything I talk with him's off the record.
So it can be off the record.
Going to put his name. He doesn't want his name, associated with.
Oh, but that's very useful information. You can at least know things.
Right, absolutely. Like, for example, in the case, I was able to verify the validity of what he told me, because when the gimbal video first came out, and he contacted me about that video and the Nimitz, because those were the two the New York Times released. And he said, that Nimitz video, I don't know anything about it. Never seen it in my life. But that other video, he said, I've seen it. And I can tell you there are 4 other videos that go with it. And he told me that it was, the Theodore Roosevelt, an aircraft carrier, and it was off the coast of Florida. So that was, with that information, we were able to identify the date that this happened, because along with, when the guy on the video says, these things are moving against the wind and it's at 120 miles per hour, we were able to calculate, we knew what altitude they were at and on what days was the wind, at that kind of speed. So
wow, that's very useful.
Yeah, so we were able to do that, and to cement that this guy was valid, the 4 videos he described, one of them was the Go Fast video. That's not what he called it. He just said, he said there was one video I saw, and he said there's this object traveling at high speed near the surface of the water, and you hear the pilot, make some comment about it. And so that got released after I talked to this guy. So then I knew, okay, he's legit. But the other videos, especially one of them, he says he would just be shocked that they ever release it.
So when a service member contacts you and speaks off the record, a couple things happen, it sounds like. One is you keep their confidence, which is really important.
Right.
Two, you have the information and that helps you guide the investigation on your side, right?
Right.
And three, you're sort of always kind of trying to check to see if they are legitimate, because anyone
Right.
could contact you and say, hi, I'm a voice at the other end of the phone.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I work for the Air Force. And
Right.
so, I mean, of course, you could tell a story that he said, well, there's these other videos, and then one of them got released. You could tell a story that he fabricated the video to make himself appear knowledgeable and give you, right? So you could go down, the problem with not having the person's name is you could go down a conspiracy theory chute with it. But if you have the person's name, you also could go down a conspiracy. Like it seems to me,
Right.
it seems to me there's a tricky balance of learning who to trust. And I think, given your expertise, I'm running this up as on the flagpole as a hypothesis. Is it the case that, given your experience in this area, you have learned enough to know whether someone is pulling your leg or not?
Yeah.
Is that true?
I can pretty much tell, who is and who isn't. And like you say, we double check to say, okay, what can I prove that they told me to verify, their statements. And we do maintain their confidentiality. Like in the case of the Nimitz report, if you read the one that was released by the SCU, Alexis Dietrich, or Dietrich, however her name's, she pronounces her last name. We do not mention her name in the report, because when we released her report in 2019, she had not made a conscious decision to go public with her story. And we had the names of every pilot that was on there, but we didn't release the ones who, we knew, even though we had not talked to them, right? But just out of, we felt that's the right thing to do.
Oh,
right?
it's definitely the right thing to do. It's very important. But should we cut that from this interview, or has she now said it's okay for you to say?
Oh no, she has now said,
okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. She's gone public, as well as Chad Underwood, who was the guy flying the aircraft that took the video.
right.
He has since gone public. So, but you don't see his name in our report, because at the time the report was released, he had not gone public.
So is the Nimitz report available on the SCU website?
Yes.
Okay,
is.
so if people wanted to download that, it's like a PDF they could download.
Right.
And then just the upshot before we get to the other questions, what was the SCU conclusion on the Nimitz report?
I'd have to go back and read the exact conclusion, because we were careful in how we worded it. But I can tell you my view was, whatever the objects were, they were not manufactured by any man-made technology. So there was no man-made technology that could explain what those objects did. So They were intelligently controlled, but whoever intelligently is controlling them were not, a nation state.
They were not a nation state.
Yeah, or
corporation.
Or a corporation. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I think you already answered this next question, because you kind of, when I asked the question about what kind of data do you look at, you kind of answered the question of what would you consider good evidence for a UAP. So I'm going to repeat back to you what I think you would consider good evidence for a UAP, and make sure I've got it. Okay. So I think you would consider good evidence for a UAP. First of all, there needs to be an actual witness who can talk to you and offer their name. Not that the other information isn't important on background, but it's very important to know that the person's willing to put it out there. It kind of means that they actually believe what they're saying. Is that right?
Right, that is correct.
Yeah. There needs to be, in addition to that, some kind of what we would call objective evidence. So video, but hopefully not just video, hopefully video plus, ideally, like if you had your best case scenario, you'd have radar, you'd have electromagnetic field detection across a broad spectrum.
Right.
You would have audio. You would have tide reports,
Exactly.
atmospheric measurements around the
Right.
area. Yeah, so basically the more the better, but you don't even look at it unless you at least have the person and what they're describing seems that it's unidentified and at least one kind of objective evidence. Is that correct?
That is correct. And let me just add, Julia, if I'm just going to do a hypothetical, for example, let's say we had a dozen different witnesses, some of whom were very well qualified, and they saw an object not at the same time, but at varied times within a very similar geographical area, right, over a few hours of time. And even though we didn't have any sensory data, right, of what you normally think of sensory data, we would probably still investigate that because a human is a form of sensory data. I mean, you have basically a computer, our brain. You have you're looking in the visible wavelength. You have auditory certain frequencies you can detect, and if your witnesses are strong, right, and you've got multiple witnesses, there's no reason not to accept that, especially if the object is close to the witnesses. In other words, it's not a light in the sky. It's, for example, the object's 500 feet away and its angular size is twice that of the full moon. So it's taking up 1 degree of space in the sky. That's fairly close, and that allows you to see features on the object.
Okay. So you said something really interesting there. You said, so first of all, I agree with you that sensory data, humans are a form of sensor, right? We have a sensory system.
Right.
That's how we figured out all these other sensors, is by trying to extend our sensory systems. But let's say you have those 12 people, they're well qualified, you trust them. But you had said if they see that at different times, would you take the data if they saw it at the same time? Or is that actually more suspicious? Or were you just making it a loose criterion to say it's okay if they don't see it at the same time? It might be spread out and hopping around.
Right. I was making it loose criteria. I mean, if they all saw it at the same time, depending on how close it was, the quality of the witnesses, and if it was a daytime sighting, et cetera, that could very well be worth investigating. The advantage of it across multiple times is there's not a simple, easy explanation of, oh, such and such must have happened, like an F-16 flew by just at the right time, and that's what everyone saw, right? So widening the time scale and the geographical area, strengthens the case.
Like the RV-47 incident where it kind of flew like 600 miles or something.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent case because you've got an event that was not a brief event. It went on, and there was sensory data, although we don't, have never been given access to that sensory data.
Yeah, that seems like it would be really neat, but I imagine that it's classified.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay, so this kind of leads to the next question, is that as I've been talking to the folks who are leading these organizations, what I've noticed is that they're kind of these piles of evidence. Like, let's say you get your 8 or 9 reports that you're willing to look at in a year. What do you call the ones that are rejected? That's a pile. Does that mean a basically mundane explanation pile? And then the ones that you're looking at, those eventually turn into probably 8 or so explanations, or different explanations, and then you have one that's of interest in terms of we really, really, really don't know what this is, and it's really interesting. So what are those piles for you, for the SCU?
Right. So those piles, when we make this initial estimation, right, which doesn't take too long, we are making an estimation of, is it worthwhile to spend 100 to hundreds of hours of manpower on this case? And if we say no, it's not, we don't actually, unlike, for example, an organization like MUFON, we don't continue to collect that data.
Right.
We basically toss it, and
Right.
it's, you know, it's gone.
Yep. And so then the ones that you do investigate, what explanations end up being likely for the ones that you eventually reject?
Oh, you mean if we initially, I mean, once we initially put in the resources on it, we're going to put in a report, whether, even if the report says, no, this is a, you know, an explainable object, or maybe it's not explainable, but the most likely, you know, situation is the following, right?
Right.
We would still continue and finalize the report, but that means that report had enough unknown to it that we decided it justified spending, you know, a large amount of time on the report.
Well, and it's really helpful to the field because people are going to see something like that again. And if you have figured out an explanation for it, then people don't have to waste their time. But
Yeah.
what kind of explanations do you come up with? Are they natural processes? Are they satellites? What are the?
Oh, so probably the most common type of situation that when you first look at it, it's like, okay, there could be something to this, or there may not. One is Chinese lanterns, or, you know, basically those fool a lot of people. And if you've ever seen one, it's really kind of spectacular when you see it.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, they're very pretty. So that's a common one. Another common one is someone has a photograph or a video, and they never actually saw the object themselves, but they seem to have picked it up. And so then you're dealing with, okay, are we dealing with an insect, you know, that zipped by, or is this especially if it's a very short time that you see the object, or is it so far away that we really can't make, you know, any type of determination? So those are probably the most common.
And then when it comes to ones that finally make it through all this, and you say, you know what, we really can't explain, there's too much data that we can't explain. Does SCU try to put forward any explanation for what could be going on? Like, do you say, we think these are extraterrestrials, or we think these are underwater beings, or these are interdimensional beings, or?
Well, like, for example, in the case of the Nimitz case, I mean, kind of by definition, if it's not made by a human, right, then it's probably extraterrestrial, because extraterrestrial simply means, you know, outside of the Earth. The one exception, or two exceptions to that, is if the hypothesis that you're dealing with a time traveler, right? So that could still be terrestrial, or the hypothesis that whatever it is has been on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years. So then in
Like
that
the
case,
breakaway civilization hypothesis?
right, or something
Yeah.
like that, right?
Yeah.
So that could technically be could be called terrestrial, but other than that,
Or
everything else
interdimensional, like,
falls into.
I guess it could also be interdimensional if you consider some other dimension of the Earth to be also the Earth.
Well, I guess if you could be in
I don't
another
know.
dimension and still be part of the Earth, yeah. I just kind of make the assumption if it's extra dimensional, it's not, you know, not of the Earth. But
Right, right. I think the time traveling hypothesis, of course, I study time travel, so I'm very interested in that, but I think it's interesting. Of course, the breakaway civilization thing is interesting, so is interdimensional, and they all have similar predictions, which are different from the predictions of extraterrestrial, which I think is interesting to investigate once we get multiple cases that have actually been through the process on this. Anyway, it would be fun. It would be fun to sort that out.
Right.
And especially their intentions, obviously. That's
yeah,
important.
intentions, that's difficult, because, right, it's kind of hard to read.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like at least their intentions aren't to immediately kill us.
Right, or at least not in the time scale we're used to.
Right.
You know, we usually think, okay, if you're going to be if you're going to attack, it's going to occur within 1 quarter or 1 year,
Right.
because that's the way we do it.
Right.
But some other civilization, they might, you know, they might look at it totally different.
Well, yeah, I mean, I keep thinking, the time frame is that's a very interesting case you bring up because, we might hire an exterminator to go around our house and look at all where the mice would come in. And then in a couple days come in and set traps.
Yeah.
And if
Or-
mice had a really, really, slow time scale, that could be like generations, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Or the exterminator, maybe he just makes a recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, I've checked it all out, and this is how I recommend you get rid of them.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think, I'm not saying I think that's what's going on,
Right,
but I
right.
understand that I'm understanding that people are talking about all these kind of theories, and I think it's useful to say like that could be happening. And but you always tend to go, I mean, people are biased towards our time frame. I mean, it has taken us until now with global climate change to recognize, well, something's really happening because it's happening to us now.
Right, right.
Right? It's not on a computer screen. So anyway, we shall see. So this is the second to last question. I added another question since I spoke with you. What has your organization focused on in the past? I think we understand that. And also the organization is pretty recent. But what could you imagine focusing on in the future? In other words, as UAPs start to become more discussed and maybe more funding streams into this area, how do you imagine SCU adapting or changing? Are you going to just keep doing the same? Or is there a breadth and a depth that you'd like to go after?
No, we would probably, adapt based on, what the government comes out and says about UAPs. I mean, right now we have projects, right, that look at trying to model, propulsion mechanisms that can do what UAPs are reported to doing. And we have a project that looks at the intention of UAPs, at least as we understand intention. Another one looks at the characterization of UAP shapes and movement, and looking at that over time. So we've got different projects that look at things about UAP. We also we're working with one university currently, and we always want to partner with additional universities. We've given briefings to Canadian members of parliament. There's government organizations within the US government that we've done a little bit of work with, but I don't want to say, what the government organization's name is. And there's been more than one, so I think two. So we, which is part of our mission and goals, which is to work with government, academia, the public, and the media. And we can be flexible based on how the UAP subject changes over time.
Great. That sounds really sane.
Yeah, we try to stay sane as possible in this subject.
Yeah, it's really important. As you know, it's really important to keep your sanity. Okay, well, that sounds wonderful. So basically, you're going to continue to pursue your mission and branch out. And I also have a feeling, and this is because I'm an SCU member, I think you're also trying to reach out to more scientists. Is that true?
To pardon?
To more scientists. Is that true?
Yes. Yes, we're always trying to reach out to more scientists. I mean, SCU now has 217 members.
Yeah.
I think approximately 1/3 of PhDs and over half have some type of advanced degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're a good example of the interest that the scientific community has in the subject, because the vast majority of our membership have scientific backgrounds, whether it's in psychology, sociology, physics, chemistry, electrical engineering. I think engineering is probably our most common subject background, which is interesting, because normally engineers are not the type that move.
Yes, they are. They totally are. They just don't show it at work. But
Yeah.
Of course they are, yeah. Because it's interesting and it's creative and it's a challenge to think how these things, if they are nuts and bolts objects, how they might be able to do what they are seen to do. So
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so oh, you didn't say the university. Do you want to say the university you're partnering with?
Well, we've done some work with the University of Toronto.
Right.
in Canada. So
Yeah, right.
they've been very helpful.
Yeah, I know a couple people there. I think it's neat. Great place. Okay, so what if I ask you the following question? I want to see what you say. Going
Sure.
forward, now that, you know, actually there's a possibility of working with the government, working with the media, working with academia on and the public on understanding UAPs scientifically. What are your hopes for that? And what are your fears? What are you trying to avoid? And what are you wanting to move towards?
So one fear would be that the government interest in the UAP subject fades away. And by the government interest, I really mean Congress, because I think it's Congress that has driven our government intelligence organizations to be more open on the subject. So I think openness is important. And what I hope for, if there was one thing that I could make happen, is that Congress would basically identify a large amount of funding using the National Science Foundation, for example, and have those funds earmarked for academia to do studying on the UAP subject, because I think that's the only way we really get a solution, or the possibility of a solution, is through academia. The military, there's too many national security implications that prevent them from truly being open about the subject.
Well, I think NSF, but also there's NASA and there's NIH, and there's NIAA. So I feel like the NIH, I mean, might sound surprising. What does health have to do with, but mental health and UAPs is critical, and it's not discussed. But what are the mental health issues that have to do with these people who report very difficult experiences with UAPs? There's mental health issues just culturally, as we start to ask the question, there's so many unknowns. What are these unknown things? Where it's a big shift to a culture, and I think it challenges our mental health to say, how we thought we had a handle on everything? Basically, we don't have a handle on this. That's right. A big deal.
Right, because if you accept the assumption, right, that we are not the top of the totem pole,
yeah,
and that should an intelligence come and visit that's thousands of years more advanced than us, then I could see two potential problems, right? One is just how individuals in society as a whole handles the issue of we are not truly in control, right? And the second issue is if you have an intelligence thousands of years more advanced, you have to consider the possibility that they could actually even implant thoughts into your head. They could make you a sociological experiment without physically anything ever happening. And to us, it would be reality, right? So I think a sociologist could imagine a lot of interesting experiments that could be done if you can basically implant thoughts into a certain percentage of a given population group, and then compare your results.
This is tricky. I mean, I absolutely agree with you. This is tricky. It's tricky because to talk about when you're talking about a civilization that may be thousands of years more advanced, whether it's us or whether it's implanting thoughts in our own heads because of what we believe to be necessary for the future, right? Let's say, or whether it's another non-human civilization. When you're working with that, you can say anything, right? You can say, well, they've got it figured out, right? They've got time travel, they've got space travel, they've got implanting thoughts. Like, you can make up technology, right? And as soon as you start making up technology, you can make a whole group of people paranoid, right? And that's another mental health piece, is like, how do you keep your sanity piece?
Right.
How do you just say, like, so what is a healthy position given that any of that could be true, how do we live in that? And I think that's a really interesting question, because that could have been true for our entire human experience, right? I mean,
Yeah,
right?
because I mean, it really messes with the foundation of who we are
Yeah.
and what we expect.
Yeah. And so it also forces us to ask the question, who are we and what do we expect?
Yeah.
And how do we have any, what does it mean to be a person? Yeah, it's super interesting. And also it's life changing. And so it seems like there's a lot to study for almost every agency that provides grants for scientific work.
Right. And like you say, like when I say this, a lot of times people misunderstand it and might think, okay, yeah, I'm thinking about all these crazy things. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying that if you're open-minded and you make assumption A and assumption B, well, then here's what you have to consider. And if you don't want to make assumption B and only assumption A, then you can keep everything under a more controlled
Yeah, I think
possibility.
I think we kind of have to go step by step, but also at the same time, I mean, this is the sanity trick, right? Going step by step, logically looking at the data and keeping sane and keeping an open mind to, okay, I could be wrong about this assumption, but I'm going to make this assumption.
Right.
It's really kind of like a meta level. It's almost like a philosopher's project.
Yeah, it is kind of like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we do enough of that. I think in the scientific community, we're really just too narrow in our focus of possibilities. It's like it's got to be in my toolbox to consider it, or it's not considered.
Right, but that's one way to keep your sanity. You know, I mean, that maybe some people need to do that to keep the sanity, right? So it could be your personality structure. Well, anyway, sorry if we went way afield, but that was really fun. Where would a service member who had an experience they want to share but anonymously, how would the service member do that?
Okay, so what they could do is contact the SCU on our website, which is exploringscu.org. And on there, there's a place where they can connect. And basically, all they would need to do is say, I would like to, share an experience or share some information. And then we would contact them through a method that would be more secure. Once we knew that's what their objective was.
Right. That sounds like a good strategy. They don't have to tell the whole experience. It's just like, hey, contact me, please. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Got it. Okay. Those are all my questions. Is there anything you want to add?
Let's see. I could talk forever on this subject, Julia. And this one just popped into my head that it always bothers me when people say, oh, we shouldn't send signals into space because the wrong people might, the wrong civilization might hear it. And we would point. I'm just shocked at that, because all you have to do is project our own society out another 50 years, and any civilization capable of getting here already knows that we exist.
I mean, we're not very quiet.
Exactly. We're not quiet. All they have to do, I'm sure their telescopes are far superior to ours. I'm sure they've already noticed that the dark side of our planet is lit up at the frequency of incandescent light, and that's not normal. So they know, that we're there, and they probably, their spectrometers have already looked at our atmosphere. They probably detected, uranium-235 and plutonium isotopes to say, okay, whoever's there has already, detonated some nuclear weapons, because these are not natural isotopes that exist.
Right. Or if it's us from the future, of course we know we're here. Or, because we were there. Or if it's, there's another way of sensing, like an internal sensing, right? Where we mostly think in terms of physics of spectrograms, etc. But if they have, let's assume telepathy is real, they can develop that technology. then they can just sense internally without even any of those external sensors.
Right, right. But even without exercising that capability, right?
Yeah,
Just
just having
using
fun.
just some of the basic capabilities that we have today, it's clear that any civilization that's 50 to 100 years more advanced than us
100%.
knows that we're here.
I mean, they would have to be stupid not to. If they were interested, they could also be uninterested, in which case
Right,
it
that's
doesn't
right.
matter if we send a signal. They're
It's,
like,
we don't care if
whatever.
they're there or not. Who cares?
Yeah, whatever. They're
Yeah.
just our loud and stupid neighbors.
Yeah, yeah. Or you know, if life is just all over the universe
Yeah.
and the galaxy, which I suspect it is,
Yeah.
you know, it may be like, okay, if we're going to head in that direction, there's so many other interesting star systems we'd like to stop by. That one's not even, you know, doesn't even make the cut.
Yeah, right, exactly. So whatever. So that's, which is fine with us because we haven't even figured out, you know, that there's other life yet. So
Yeah.
all right. Well, cool. I think that's a good stopping place. Thanks. I'll turn off the recording. And thanks for doing this.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking forward to what you come up with on your. It should. I mean, you could almost write a really interesting paper on.
Yeah, it might end up being, you know, I don't know. We'll see. I can't ever know ahead of time what ends up coming out of my
Yeah.
tippity tappity, but we'll see.